I really have been focused on being a mentor, but also sometimes a mentee, really understanding the role of age in the workplace is not always top down,
Right.
being open to treating and embracing age and young people, old people. I think we have a lot of outdated assumptions about um, how age plays out in the workplace. And I really work at trying to be a model um, of being a good citizen in the workplace from an age perspective. Because I have millennial children who talk about how they feel that they are stereotyped in the workplace, and I even see it just anecdotally from LinkedIn and other articles that people make assumptions about how you work and your work habits based on how old you are. And I just think that's a mistake. And I think a lot of older people can make the mistake of making assumptions, and a lot of younger people make mistakes and make assumptions about older people. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to bring up better awareness about our stereotypes about age in the workplace and do what we can to dispel those.
Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schaap, co-founder of Social Driver. Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably the world. We are featuring leaders who figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy world. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Edna Kane Williams. Edna is the Executive Vice President at AARP, the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering Americans 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. Now, before we dive in, here are 3 things I think you should know about Edna. Number 1, she spent more than 25 years at AARP in a number of roles, including as Senior Vice President of Multicultural Leadership, and now, of course, as Executive Vice President. I think it's safe to say that AARP has evolved during her tenure, and we'll hear how today. Number 2, in her current role, Edna's responsibilities include driving AARP's enterprise diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, encompassing the association's workplace and marketplace. She continues to lead strategies for multicultural audiences and age discrimination strategy work, which were part of her previous portfolio. And she also oversees the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Council and AARP's Strategic Enterprise Employee Resource Groups. Number 3, Edna has degrees from Yale and the George Washington University, our chief influencer partner. She brings some pretty incredible outside experiences to her work that I want you to know about. She serves on the boards of the Legal Counsel for the Elderly and the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. She's also a member of the advisory board for the new Smithsonian American Women's History Museum. And you have been called many things: a Coro Fellow, trustee for the country's largest modern dance company, ASAE Diversity Executive Leader, Spirit of Democracy Award winner, Dorothy Height Humanitarian of the Year, Diversity
Oh,
Magazine's Elite 100. Well, today we're thrilled to call you Chief Influencer. Welcome.
thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. We've been planning this for months, it seems like, so I'm glad to be finally talking with you.
Well, I've been really looking forward to this too because, I knew a little bit about your career at AARP, and then diving in to just see how multifaceted your career is, not only inside the organization, but outside with all of those things that we just heard in the introduction. And I'm really curious how you bring those experiences to your day job and vice versa, bring those experiences that you have from your day job to, serve on the board of Alvin Ailey, for example, which I was so lucky to see them perform way back when I was in college, and they actually toured to Kansas City, where I went to college. So,
Oh, really, really, yeah. That's one of my favorite extracurricular activities. What you didn't mention is I'm actually a boomerang employee at AARP. While you said I worked at AARP for 25 years, that's actually it hasn't been consecutive. I've come and gone 3 different times, so that shows you the love I have for this organization. Is that I've actually come and gone and come and gone. It's been a continuing love story for me. So I've been back now for a considerable amount of time. I started initially in the 80s, and then I left, and I came back in the 90s, and then I left And then I came back in 2007, and I've been back since then. But it hasn't been consecutive, but it's always been a place that was near and dear to my heart, and a great place to work. And that's why I kept returning.
Well, say more about that, because I think it says a lot when somebody takes a step in their career to do something different and then they're drawn back multiple times, like you
Yeah.
said. So what has drawn you back?
Well, and I think it's something I often, and of course the job and work life is so different now. But one, I that's one thing I think I did right in my career is that I always kept contact, and you leave doors open. And I think I met so many incredible people here at AARP that it was always a place that I wanted to stay connected with, and people that I cared about, that were part of a work family that meant a lot to me. So the first time I always left for what I thought were interesting opportunities that I wanted to explore. And I came back for opportunities that I wanted to explore. A couple of times I came back on my own initiative. The last time I came back, I really was touching base with a friend who at the time was the head of the foundation, and we were just having lunch, and she said, "Oh, did you ever think about returning?" I said, "No, not really. I'm pretty happy where I am." And she just happily pursued me over a couple of months, and I returned, and I thank her to this day, because it turned out to be a really great move for me. But it was really just a connection lunch, because she was someone that I greatly admired, and we had kept touch with each other. At that point, I had been gone for about 7 or 8 years. And so it's an advice I give a lot of younger people, and I don't need to now because the market is so much more fluid. People often move in and out of organizations, but I still give the advice that even as you move in and out of organizations, the connection that you keep with people, I still find to be very like an important thing that you should keep in mind. And I just had someone the other day that I worked with literally 10, 11 years ago touch base with me about giving them a recommendation. I was happy to do it. And I was also happy that we were still in contact. And I wasn't necessarily giving them a recommendation from the work that we did 10 or 12 years ago, which I think would have been a little dated. But it was because she was still in my life, and I still felt like I could talk about who she was as a worker today because of the connection that we kept. So I think that's a lesson that I learned, that you keep robust connections from work experiences, no matter what, because they can serve you well.
That is so true. And I mean, you mentioned the people and the family drawing you back. And one of the things I was reflecting on, just looking at your career from the work that you do now, marketing, but then also the arts, I was like, what is the common thread there? Seems like, touching people's lives is really a through line. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about, because it also sounds like that's part of what's motivated you to boomerang back to AARP so much. There's so many different words that we can use to describe things that we do, but often like it comes down to people and putting people at the center. And I wonder if that's the way you think about your career as you look back.
Yeah, well, especially when you work at a place like AARP, that is such a, it really is a privilege to work someplace that you can really say that day in and day out, your organization makes such a huge impact on people's lives, from, the landscape today of literally playing a role in saving programs like Social Security and Medicare. Back during COVID, I was enormously proud of the role we played in making sure that older people in nursing homes and just making sure that the needs of older adults of all shades, poor, Black, brown, white, rural, that people didn't forget what they needed, that in terms of when vaccines were developed, that this organization, when special subsidies were available, what did we call them? When the special funds were available, that really making sure that the needs of people over the age of 50 were considered, along with everybody else, that we really made a difference in terms of making sure that the special equipment, that it's not often that you can see a direct impact of your work. And I'm just really gratified that I get to work in an organization that you don't have to wait years and years and years to see. of what you do daily. So I don't take that for granted, and it makes it easier to show up and to work as hard as we do. I have great respect not only for the work that my team does, but for the lobbyists in this organization and the people who do the programming. I mean, it makes it just so easy, as I said, to show up and to suit up every day.
Absolutely.
But in terms of my career, it's people oriented in that way. But the older I get, it's really has been a focus. And when I think of my legacy, it's not only those that we serve, but it's also I've really been focused. I think when you've had a career like mine, if you aren't focused on mentoring, and there's been so much talk about the new realities of intergenerational workforces. This is the first time, I think, in the history of our country where we now have a 5-generation workforce. That literally, you have boomers, you have Gen Z, you have millennials, you have Gen X, you have Alpha. All working in the same workplace, and it's created a huge shift and really huge adjustments in terms of, and it's not always boomers. You have boomers working for millennials working for boomers. It's just it takes a lot of adjustments, and I really have been focused on being a mentor, but also sometimes a mentee. Really understanding the role of age in the workplace is not always top down. Being open to treating and embracing age and young people, old people. I think we have a lot of outdated assumptions about how age plays out in the workplace. And I really work at trying to be a model of being a good citizen in the workplace from an age perspective. Because I have millennial children who talk about how they feel that they are stereotyped in the workplace. And I know even Gen Z feel it even more. And I even see it just anecdotally from LinkedIn and other articles that people make assumptions about how you work and your work habits based on how you how old you are. And I just think that's a mistake. And I think a lot of older people can make the mistake of making assumptions, and a lot of younger people make mistakes and make assumptions about older people. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to bring up better awareness about our stereotypes about age in the workplace and do what we can to dispel those. So I'm on a personal mission, and I think those of us at AARP who are more aware of how damaging stereotypes can be in the workplace, that we should do our best to try to counteract and dispel those. So that's my own sort of personal mission at this point in my work life.
Yeah. Well, I like that you talked about that, but also you paired it with the example of mentorship, of being a mentor and a mentee.
Absolutely.
And, I think that that's really important for folks to hear, because when we think about influence, what I've learned from so many of our chief influencers is that influence isn't one way, but it's really two ways. You have to allow yourself to be influenced. And that's exactly what I think you're saying when you say, look, sometimes I'm the mentor, but sometimes I'm the mentee and I'm learning. And isn't that one of the best ways that we can build those bridges across generations in the workplace?
Yes, it's lifelong learning. It always goes both ways. And just being open to always understanding what you know, but what you don't know. Yeah. And and that can be a challenge for folks to understand that you don't always have the answer. And that's been part of my awareness in my roles. Is titles don't mean that you know everything. And sometimes when you have these illustrious introductions like you gave me, it can lead to this sense of smugness, like, well, I'm at the top of the heap, so I must know everything. And you can inadvertently bring that into the workplace. And so I work at humility and understanding that I don't have all the answers. And I think that's the best thing you can bring to a team is, yes, as a leader, you have to lead. And sometimes that means making decisions, but it also means understanding that in making a decision, sometimes you have to acknowledge that you need to seek the advice of others, and that often includes everybody in the room, young, old, whoever, to make the best decision that you can.
Yeah. I
And
think
that's one of the that took a long time for me to understand that, because I'm both an introvert and I'm very I pride myself in being self-sufficient. Um, but and for a long time in my career, that meant that I sort of, gathered up the facts and sort of made the decision on my own. And I felt that that was the best way, that was the most efficient way to operate. But I've learned that that isn't necessarily the best way to do things. That gathering facts and involving people of all ilk, young, old, you know, you know, uh, uh, it, it, uh, drawing from outside of yourself,
Yeah.
can be very helpful in making sure that you're crisp in your thinking and in your decision making.
I think that's such a great lesson. And I appreciate how you shared it too, that it's something you didn't always know, but that took
Oh,
time for you to learn, because it's important for folks to hear, you know, you weren't just born with all of these leadership capabilities that you have today. You developed them as you moved through your career and had different leadership opportunities that you took advantage of. And one of the things you learned is that, just going away and doing it all yourself might be really efficient, but actually it's not the best way to get where you want to go. And you have to include people across, even if you're an introvert and it may not be the most natural thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the privilege of age, is learning from your mistakes and also failure. I mean, I one thing I do enjoy about our current state of work life, which I think we've since COVID, it's just been remarkable how much work has changed and how much work life has changed. But one big change that I perceive, haven't necessarily read a lot of necessarily scholarly articles, but I do pick up from the workforce and from the people around me that folks are less risk averse maybe than they were in the past, especially young people, that they're willing to take more chances, willing to risk failure more. And I think that's great. I think that's going to benefit us because you have to put yourself out there,
Yeah.
and failure in the short term for greater success in the long term, I think is worth it.
Well,
And I think that's something I didn't recognize in my younger years. Is being too. I think I was too risk averse for too long, worried about sort of short term risk, not understanding that failure in and of itself is not bad. I definitely understand that now, and now sort of take the approach of, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? And now, as long as I understand what the worst thing is that can happen and sort of account for that and
yeah.
can see my way through it, I'm more calm about it.
Well,
And I can account for it. And that's manageable. So
yeah.
that's managing risk and that's managing the failure. It's when it catches me off guard because I haven't planned for it, that is what is most unsettling. But if I can manage the risk and if I can account for it, count for the failure, then I'm good to go. And that's been a real help for me in my career, is accounting for failure, understanding failure, using failure, because you can use it to great end if you understand it.
I love that. You mentioned a couple things that I want to pull back to. You mentioned putting yourself out there and how important that is. And that can mean a few different things, but the way I want to go is one in particular. And then you also talked about being an introvert. And being an introvert and putting yourself out there sometimes I think can be hard. And in today's environment, there's not a bright line between a leader's professional brand and their personal brand, like perhaps there once was. And of course, people respond so much to authenticity, but many leaders, they tell us they really struggle finding that balance. And I want to hear a little bit from you how you decided when to share your own personal experiences in your work. For example, last year you wrote a piece about retirement disparities and you used a personal story to relate to it. And I'll just read a really short excerpt from it because I think it's a good example of what we're talking about. You wrote, my mother worked as a union factory worker, and in retirement, she received $68 a month from her pension. She was proud of the career she had, but the money wasn't enough to live on, so she moved in with me. Luckily for us, she had that option. Unfortunately, many families have minimal choices when it comes to their retirement years, and many jobs no longer offer pensions or other retirement benefits. I wonder if you could talk about how you've used your own lived experiences as part of your work and how you decide when to do that, because it is putting yourself out there to share personal stories like that. And everyone has to find their own balance, I suppose.
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's something that I struggled with. And I would have done something differently, say 20 years ago. One, in my role, it I ultimately decided that it's important for me to be able to give voice to one. I grew up in North Philadelphia, which is a predominantly Black and very poor area of Philadelphia. Was then and is now. Was 50 years ago, is now probably worse. And most of my family, not my immediate family is unfortunately all gone. But my extended family, for the most part, still lives there. So it's still very much a part of who I am. On the one hand, but now I live this sort of removed life. So part of when you talk about being authentic, part of my authenticity is this schizophrenia that I live this life now in this DC area that a lot of the people who I am from and who I grew up with could not relate to at all. And so are not of this life, but I am of their life. And I never want to forget being of their life. So part of my authenticity is trying to keep those connections. And my mother, who's been gone for a while, in many ways, she could not relate to this life that I now have the blessings and joy of living. So part of the stories and part of being authentic is making the connection and sort of reveling back to her story is my story in a way, and telling her story and connecting to her story helps me be authentically a part of her. It also helps me through her honor, the life she had to lead, and the struggles she had to have. Her struggle is my struggle. So it's giving voice to that. And the fact that I understand that helps me do the job that I am doing, because I didn't have that struggle, but she had that struggle. And in helping her, now that I don't have to live on $68 a month, but I understand what it's like. I don't have to worry about lights being off, but I know 80-year-olds who do. I don't have to make, $200 a month feed 4 grandchildren. I know 80-year-olds who are responsible for grandchildren who do. So that is a part of my reality. That is a part of being authentic, because if I ignored that, or if I didn't own that is a part of who I am ultimately, that wouldn't be authentic. And if I allowed my introversion not to give voice to that, I feel like that's my responsibility. That's my responsibility that's a part of me also. And so I have long recognized that at the end of the day, I'm exhausted because I am truly an introvert. So, but people that I work around, not to get too personal, often don't believe it, because I can be very animated during the day and I collapse at night. And I talk to a lot of introverts who say the same thing. An introvert doesn't draw energy from people. People drain them, but we can operate that way. And I have a job that really demands that I give energy all day long, but at some point you're depleted. At the end of this session, I will be depleted. Where some people would draw energy from you and just, be able to go, but I think it's a depletion for good use. I get to do this job that I've already said, I think it's just a privilege to have. I don't shovel garbage during the day. I don't, this is a rarefied air that I get to breathe and do every day. So I consider it a privilege. So I long made peace with the fact that, yes, you have to sort of, step out of your comfort zone to do this job every day. But, you're not in the factory, sewing kids' clothes for 8 hours a day, hunched over that, my mother, did, just, I mean, come on, I can do this. You did that. This is like, it's not a burden,
Yeah.
so I feel like it's not a, um, it's not a tough thing for me to do it all. And it's a part of it. And so I'm not being inauthentic. It's just, that's how I have to leverage myself in order to tell the stories and to be the person I need to be to do the job in the best way I can, in order that I can honor
Yeah.
um, the a part of my world that I feel is a part of that I want to remain connected to in order to be as authentic. I don't want to ever forget that piece of me that makes me as authentic. Um, and that I think is important that my kids and my grandkids stay connected to. I don't ever want to lose that. That was very long-winded, but I hope you get what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. And I wonder if I could ask, you mentioned your mother, and it sounds like she was a real inspiration for you.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about the different worlds you lived in. I just wonder if you could share, anything about what you learned about influence from your mother, because I just think so many the folks I've spoken with, it's their family early on that they sometimes learn those core lessons from that stick with them their whole careers.
Well, sure. So you say, so I um, went to Yale University and I went to GW for a master's degree. I finished Yale in 3 years. I mean, my mother, daughter of sharecroppers in the South, barely finished sixth grade. I had visited the one-room schoolhouse that she attended. I have, stood in the fields that she worked as a child. And that's why she only went to school through sixth grade, because her father, my grandfather, he was a minister, but he was also a sharecropper. And she had 15 brothers and sisters. And most of the older ones, now her younger three or four brothers and sisters, they did finish school. But the older ones stopped school at a certain point to help in the fields. So, my mother was not erudite. She was not, I don't think she knew what Yale was when I applied, but she knew that I had dreams. And so her life became helping me with my dreams. But she was not learned in that way. She was religious because that was the spirit that, her father was a minister and she knew church, and she made sure that me and my brothers knew church. But she was not a learned person. She was not necessarily a book reader. She was a moral person. She worked every day. My father worked every day. She thought I was a high-strung child because I was so, obsessive about grades and school. And she used to tell me, it's fine if you get a B. I mean, she wasn't that kind of, you have to do, she was a very measured person, but she couldn't relate a lot to, I was very different to her, but, she wanted me to succeed because she could tell it was important to me. But she couldn't really grasp a lot of the rings that I was grasping for. But she reveled that I wanted them. And once she went up to Yale, and once she even went up that far north, which she had never been to Connecticut. I think as far north as she had been was to New York, because, and once I read about the Great Migration, her family, they were in South Carolina. Some sisters went to Philadelphia, some went to Ohio, some went to New York. It was very traditional. Once you read how the migration went, and the sisters went, brothers stayed back home. It was really fascinating. Once I read about the migration patterns, but she had never gone further than New York. So all of it was a wonder to her, but she never put any restraints on me. In a lot of ways, I think she lived vicariously through me, but she didn't understand a lot of it. But if I wanted to do it, she tried to make a way, as did my father. But um, uh, I just, so and like many children, I more appreciate my mother now than I did then, because it's only belatedly how I understand um, her life and well, what a conundrum I must have presented to her, and it's only belatedly that I realize how different we were and how I now see her life with so bereft of a lot of things, but she made do. Um, and um, and I ultimately our decade of my caregiving um, uh, saved me in a lot of ways, because I think if I had not had that opportunity to give back in that way, um, I'm just so grateful that that was my ultimate gift back to her. It didn't even the score, because I still think she gave so much more to me. But uh, I'm just so glad I had that opportunity to give to her. So yeah, she was extraordinary, not in the typical ways, but as are all mothers. But and she wouldn't know what to make. I often regret that neither one of my parents lived long enough to see um, where I am today, because they just, in different ways, they just would not know what to make of this at all.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. I'm a proud GW graduate myself, and I can attest that the faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information.
As you talk about your mother, one of the things you shared that I thought was so interesting, and as you mentioned, you were pushing to get A's. That was not like the parents saying you got to get an A on everything.
Not at all.
You were pushing
Oh, no,
yourself,
not at all.
but your mother encouraged you. And I kind of wanted to just take that into our conversation about mentorship, because I think that's one of the most important ways, forms, I guess I would say, of influence, right? Because when you mentor somebody, I mean, you're really bringing up the next generation. I know you have a passion for mentoring and mentoring women in particular, helping them grow and succeed. And I'm just wondering if your style of mentorship, if it mirrors at all that type of encouragement you got, where there's somebody who's really driven and you're not the one pushing them to be the best, but helping them, encouraging them and helping them kind of get where they want to go. I don't know if there's a connection there, but it just occurred to me that maybe those early
I
experiences.
have a little bit of both subtle and direct mentorship. I try to, in the last couple of years, I've really been more explicit. Like, even when opportunities come to me, I'll defer and say, because I've done enough public speaking, for example, in my life. So if a speech or being on a panel will come to me, I will, accept, but then offer to somebody else, because I think the time has come in my career to make way for other people, particularly younger people. I don't need to do another speech. I don't need to take another trip. So I've been actively trying to plant and move out of the way so that other people can be in the limelight. So sometimes it's creating those opportunities in terms of public speaking. Inside the building, I often talk to people about marketing their brand and being more visible. And I'm very much of the mind that being laid back, especially in big organizations. And this is coming from an introvert, and I had to learn that sometimes you do have to make a name for yourself. And some people disagree with me, and that's fine. But I can remember, and I tell this story often, I had been in a room of 20 people. This was very early in my career. And I had met somebody a couple of days later, and I was recounting something that had happened in the meeting, and I hadn't said anything. They're like, "How do you know that? You weren't in the meeting." I was like, "Yeah, I was in the meeting." And they argued me down, and I wasn't in the meeting. And I went away thinking, okay, you were in that meeting for 2 hours and nobody knew you were in the meeting and I just swore that to myself that that would never happen again, that I would make sure that if I'm in a meeting, I would make it known that I was in a meeting and say at least something, not just frivolously, but make it known that I was in the meeting. So I recommend that to people, to make it known, make your presence known. Again, not through frivolity, but, you know, try to be substantial in some way. I was in another event the other day and yes, a more junior person, but I was at the table and I coughed and and I started to get up and she said, no, 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 I'll get you some water. And she was not, and I walked out of the room with her and I said, it's not your job to get me water. I can get my own water. You know, don't position yourself as being the person in the room that gets people water. That's not your job. She said, "Oh, I just wanted to," and I said it kindly, and it was nice of her. But you know, I mean, you just have to make choices about how you show up. And I think women, especially, often defer to being nice and being, you know, seen as the helpmate, and sometimes that doesn't help your brand. And so I just asked her. I said, you know, you don't want to do that, especially in this kind of room. And, you know, and so, um, I like to be both, and I said it somewhat sternly initially because I wanted to almost physically hold her like, no, instead we walked out together and I sent her back in because I wanted them to see her go back in without the water and me come back in with the water, because sometimes that makes a difference. And she wasn't conscious, but you know, so I try to be very, so I'm taking that on. That's really my mission. That's going to be my legacy is being a very active teacher almost these last years of my career. So you can be benign about it. And I think it's sort of wordsmithing. People have started parsing out. There's a sponsor, there's a champion, and there's a mentor. I don't really care about the work. I just want to help women and men. I also know that I'm known for women, but I just want to help folks in their careers because I think I have some lessons that I can share with folks. So sometimes I'm acting as a sponsor, sometimes I'm acting as a mentor. I do think mentorship has turned into this sort of benign thing where where you can shirk a lot of responsibility. I like the term sponsor because it really means that even without the person knowing, you're sort of advocating and really trying to position them. And I think, especially people in my role, you know, I can often drop names or really work to get people in roles, in jobs, even unbeknownst to them. And I think if you can do that, you should do that because people did it for us. I know people have done it for me. And shame on you if you don't do that for other folks. I just think people within your power, you should be doing things for other people, whether on a job, whether in a volunteer role. It doesn't cost me anything. Why wouldn't I do it? Why wouldn't I? And I think ultimately it makes me look better. And it's still, guess what? It's still power brokering. So if that's your thing, you're still getting, you know, I still think I still get a, you know, I'm not accruing money, but you're still, you know, playing chess. You're just playing chess to somebody else's benefit. And that's as exciting to me as if it were, you know, it's almost more exciting if I can do it and see somebody else benefit at this stage, because I don't need to accrue anymore.
I like that. I like the anecdotes you sort of paired together in talking about that, where on one hand, you gave an example of, you know, people need to know that you're present in the room and that you're adding value because you don't have influence if people, your example, that person argued with
Yeah.
you that you were even there. I mean, it's what a funny thing. But just kind of that underscores that. And then at the same time, um, knowing when it makes sense to defer those opportunities to other people and make sure that that their presence matters. Like, you
Right.
mentioned you may get a speaking opportunity, but you've had a lot of those. And if you defer it to someone else, you give them the opportunity to have that platform. And I just love how you put those anecdotes together because it is a balance, isn't it? That
Right.
on one hand, you do have to know when to promote your work and your ideas. If you're not, if, who's going to do it if you're not going to do it. And then at the same time, you have to know when to bring other people along and elevate them. And to me, it kind of goes to a theme that I've talked about with some of the other guests about influence inside. A lot of times people think of influence, they think of like, a megaphone to the world. And what we've heard from so many people is that sometimes the influence inside of an organization is just as important and even more difficult.
Right.
How to show up in that boardroom, how to get the right people around the table. And, AARP, really large organization. You've spent a lot of time there over those 3 different stints. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your perspective on effective influence inside of an organization.
Well, yes, and sometimes it's interesting. I have been at AARP, now consecutively because I have been back since 2007, but collectively from 2000, from before the 2000s. Let's just leave it at that. And I have more influence than I often give myself credit for, and I'm going to. And so I speak to everybody, and I think this is a lesson I often tell people. You make eye contact in elevators, whatever. You speak, you smile, you engage. I'm very good at that, but I'm always, and I probably should admit it, I'm always surprised at how many people know me by name. And even at this point in my life, I'm not great at capturing names all the time. I know faces, but in AARP, and we have more new people, especially since COVID. Um, um, but I'm always surprised at how many people that I don't think I know me. And I think that, and certainly because I'm an E team member, I think that, and because I'm the chief diversity officer, and I'm a larger than life. If you're an EVP, an executive vice president at AARP, there's only 11 or 12 of us. So of course, that's a level of influence that most people don't have. But I sometimes, even at this point in my career, um, uh, underestimate my influence, or tools like LinkedIn, where I in any week can have 50 invitations from people. And I don't think that's, and I'm wondering, why do you want, why do you want to connect with me? And I think LinkedIn is a false barometer these days of influence. It's almost like well, I won't get into LinkedIn. But um, but I no longer, I don't, what I'm trying to say is I'm not a good gauge anymore I'm not a good read of my own influence.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I, I know that I have, people often tell me but I know I sometimes opt out of meetings in the building. So you asked about in the building.
Yeah.
And like, for example, I am I am responsible for our ERGs, one of the best parts of my job. And we have soon to be 11 ERGs. We have very high rate of participation, wonderful engagement. I selectively go to some of the activities because I'm such my presence sometimes changes the dynamic in a room. So is that influence? Yes. And I think I like to think positively. Like I think I like to think I'm a good person. I'm a team person, but it makes a difference is if an EVP is sitting in the room versus if it's just a regular, group of folks. They might not talk the same way. They might not cover the same topics. So I try to gauge how I show up so that my influence doesn't change the direction of the discussion or whether people are more open or closed to engage with each other. So it's something that I didn't used to have to grapple with it now that I do. But I am very cognizant that I can be a big voice in a room. Uh, uh, and I try to measure that and make sure that my influence doesn't overwhelm others or doesn't overwhelm the voices of others. I think people who are influencers, and I'm really fascinated by influencers in a social space. I don't consider myself a social influencer, and I just think social influencers are really fascinating, how they start and how they sort of grow. But I think it can be dicey, and the whole authentic versus inauthentic can also be dicey. So I think your podcast, the chief influencer, the notion of being a chief influencer and the notion of being an influencer, I think, and what's a good influencer and what makes a good influence, I think is a great conversation piece.
Well, obviously, I agree that it's a good thing to discuss, because one of the things I've sort of discovered interviewing all these amazing people is that, if someone's a chief fill in the blank, probably that was somebody appointed or elected them to that, right? A board of directors or a CEO said, I'm giving you this title. And
Right.
there's the title, though, that someone has to embrace on their own that no one can give them as chief influencer. Someone to say,
Right.
I'm going to harness the power of my personal brand and my influence to drive impact, whether that's inside my organization or outside. And something you said that I just think is a really good item for folks to consider is the influence you wield, whether you mean to or not. As you have a big title, you're one of only, 11 or so people on this executive leadership team in a large organization that everybody in the world probably has heard of, certainly everybody in our country. And you deciding to be in a meeting changes the dynamic of who wants to speak and share ideas and and deciding when to not show up and when to not wield that influence, and just being aware of that
Mhm.
power that you have. I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but as you described it, it just struck me. I've heard a lot of leaders say, yeah, I used to be a big brainstormer in meetings. And then when I got to a certain level, I realized any idea I threw out, people would think it was an order and they would go do it.
Right.
And I was like, no, I was just brainstorming, but at a certain level, you have that power of influence where people think
Right.
that you're giving them an order. And so
Right.
your awareness of that, I think, is so smart. And I can see why that has probably been really effective for you to not only build yourself as an influential person inside your organization and beyond, but then to learn how to harness the power of that influence. And you gave an example earlier about get invited to speak, but you give that opportunity to somebody else so that they have that opportunity. That's an example of being really thoughtful about how you wield your own influence.
Yeah. Or in terms of the brainstorming, or just being conscious that don't go first or go last or go in the middle. Just don't stifle, the conversation, because influencing, can be overwhelming. If you
Yeah.
are an influencer, it can really drown out other voices. And
Yeah.
I think if you are a chief influencer, then it's incumbent upon you to make sure that part of the role of a chief influencer is to amplify
Yes.
other voices. To me, I
Yeah.
think that should be incumbent upon them, not diminish other voices. But that's not an easy thing to do, because it's very seductive being an influencer, right? You sort of get used to your own voice, because that's part of the game is winding yourself up and playing the tune. So
Yeah.
it's hard to turn yourself off.
I love the word amplify that you used. I think that that's
Yeah.
such a important power that an influencer has. And I have to ask you, I know we're getting kind of toward the end of our time here, but I just was so fascinated when I learned that you are a trustee for the Alvin Ailey Dance Company. For folks who don't know,
Mhm.
it's the largest modern dance company in America. Just such an incredible organization with a storied history. I just wonder, it just occurs to me, there must be lessons that you have learned or experiences you've had being part of that, which was very different from probably the corporate environment that you're in day to day, and just kind of cross-pollinating some of those lessons or the people that you interact with. Are there any lessons from lessons about influence that you've taken from the Alvin Ailey Dance Company?
Well, I got involved because, Alvin Ailey, the dance company itself is such an iconic. I can remember, again, growing up in North Philadelphia, and I went to all Black schools, period, throughout. Um, and I was a part of a magnet program that would give tickets, reduced cost tickets to cultural events. And I can remember um, uh, going once to see the Alvin Ailey company perform.
Wow.
And it was a rarity. I'd never seen anything like it, and just being struck. It wasn't, and I saw it once and never saw it again. And again, saw it once in college, and then once I became of age, was able to buy, and but it was always such it remained in my mind a singular event of achievement and wonderment. And so when I they that's what this job did for me. It gave me a level of notoriety that when they approached me with the notion of being on their board, um, and the opportunity to become a part of this iconic organization, of course I said yes. Um, and to learn the Alvin Ailey story about he, again, grew up in the South, very different from my mom, but but his beginnings resonated with me, and then you know um, his journey to California and then New York. It's just and I don't have any kind of artistic talent whatsoever. So also just to live vicariously. I mean, a lot of people involved are of the dance world. I am not at all. But it's just appreciating the art world and all that he went through, and wanting to be a part of making sure that that kind of legacy remains. That was the attraction to me, that if I can have any role in ensuring that the legacy of Alvin Ailey continues, because I know what it meant to me to first see it in high school, and just wanting to ensure that for many, many years to come, that not only Black children, but children of all um, walks of life be able to. I mean, it's a wonder. It's dance itself. So, talking about art broadly, but African American dance specifically. That the example that Alvin Ailey represents, I think, is a treasure, and it's a real honor for me to be involved in it. And uh, it's just one example again, the specialness of my career, and the things that I've been allowed to do, that sometimes I just have to pinch myself.
Well, that's kind of a good place for us to transition to my last question about your career. I'm just wondering, and as you look back across your career, what are the most important lessons that you've learned about the power of influence, and maybe what that's resulted in even at AARP?
Well, as I look back to this moment now, as I focus on, the importance of advocating for all people, but especially marginalized community, as I think of how I grew up in North Philadelphia. Um, uh, uh, I what I tell myself each morning is how important it is to be resilient, to not give up. I was talking to somebody else, again, a younger person, the other day, and they asked me for advice because their energy was flagging. And I said, you suit up.
Right.
You all have to suit up and deal with this, deal with whatever the situation is. Life and work can hand you cyclical moments of challenge. And we all experience it. But how you, and this might sound trite, but how you respond and how you react and how you overcome is a testament to who you are. And I am resolved that I show up every day in a way that honors who I am and who I'm from. And I'm from people who don't give and suit up and overcome. And I'm here for it.
So well said. Edna Kane Williams, EVP at AARP. We're just so grateful that you joined us today to share your story of your boomerang career at AARP, working on so many different initiatives, but also I really appreciate you sharing your personal story, talking about your parents, in particular, your mom, and how even though you lived in different world later in life and then came back together when you served as her caregiver, how much you learned from that experience and how it really influenced you as someone who is a chief influencer and influences and mentors so many others. And I think one of the big takeaways for me today are the examples that you wove in about influence being two ways, whether
Mhm.
you're in a conference room or a boardroom and, giving others that opportunity to speak first, thinking about also out in the world and leveraging the lived experiences that you've had and really taking that under consideration as you work on behalf of those who are marginalized. Influence isn't just one direction. It's not just having a megaphone. And for an introvert like you, I think you shared some really great examples that not only fellow introverts, but so many others can learn from. And lastly, I just love that you shared some things you learned in your career later on, but that you said you didn't know early on, and it took time
Mhm.
to learn those. And I think it takes a lot of humility to just remind everyone that it's not a straight line. And some of the great lessons that you're sharing with us are things that, you had to make mistakes and fail to learn those yourself and grow.
Yeah.
And certainly those you mentor and sponsor and champion and all of us benefit from those lessons you share. So thank you. I really, really appreciate you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for the invitation.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.